Jim, I didn't hear from recently, and I don't recall if he said anything in May. I think that would have been too early, I don't think he said anything. He still- Okay, we can go ahead and call the meeting to order for the Utility Policy Committee, July 11th, 2024. And the next item is to set the agenda. Any additions or changes? Is there a motion?
So move. Support.
Motion by Mayor, support by Tom to approve the agenda as presented. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 6-0 and 1 absent. Next item on the agenda is introductions and guests. I think this group knows everyone, and Mark Elliott and Anna Horner from Oshtemo Public Works. I think we're probably good there. Online, we have Anna Crandall from the city, Sherry Bell from Oshtemo, Dan Dombos from Avonmarsh, Jim Bierman from Stantec, Jeff Sorensen from Cooper, Joe Bonham from the city, and Steve Vincenzi also from the city. Welcome, everyone. Item number 4 is acceptance of the May 9th, 2024 draft minutes. Any changes to those?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Somewhere in there, my name is incorrect. It needs an F.
Somewhere.
I can't remember what it was, but I saw it somewhere in there.
Okay.
I'll make a motion to accept the minutes as presented with the correction for Peter's name.
Support.
There's a motion by John, support by Tom Wheat to accept the May 9th, 2024 minutes. Any further discussion with the one correction? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 6-0 and 1 absent. Public comment, item number 5. Any public comment from those present here today or online? Hearing none, we'll move on to the unfinished business. Item 6A is the utility financial policy. And as discussed in May, the subcommittee was continuing to work on the draft policy amendments. I don't know if we call it a policy or a policy amendment. And we have a proposal before us today. And the committee members, Jeff Chamberlain, Peter, and Steve are online. Can walk us through that?
Sure. So you should have a handout. Do you want to walk through it, or?
No, you please.
You have a memo in your packet, and we met multiple times, and we drafted up a document, and you have it, and it has black and red on it. It's the second page in, and we tried to capture what is required in black, and then what would be the proposed policy in red. I would point out that under construction, the second bullet should be red, and it does carry over to the policy. So I will just walk you through what I understand, and by all means, Steve and Jeff, if you see that I'm wandering or getting off course, let me know. Under the first category at the top, it says bond debt service coverage. And per the bond ordinances, the coverage requirement is that there is 120% of debt service covered based on a specific calculation. And that calculation is looking at operating revenue and operating expenses and backing out some non-cash items. And a picture of that is provided, and I'll walk you through that calculation. But the policy that the committee suggested was that there would be bond debt service coverage ratio of 140%, which is in excess of the 120% required by the bond ordinance. Thinking you don't want to go under 120, so let's leave a little margin of error. It allows the city to have in excess of 140%. And the theory here is these various reserves that are presented below, if there is excess dollars, those reserves below basically would be reduced. So it's kind of an equalizing effect. So at the top, bond debt service coverage suggested of 140%. And then the bond reserves.
A question on that?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Question on that, what's that number today?
There is let me just see if I can tell you exactly, because I think it is on a document included.
Should be on
Yes,
this page here, Peter.
it is the second page from the last. And you can see last year that bond debt service coverage was 3 times. Instead of 120%, it was 300%. The year before that, it was 176. And it goes all the way back to 2013, it was 2 times, or 200%, 140, 150. But during the rate-making process, there's a target set, and then based on the results, you get a different balance.
So actuality is they run higher, this is the floor.
Right, so that is the minimum that we
Yeah.
would suggest being calculated in. And so that coverage could be higher if they intend to fund more capital with cash. So you would have more dollars coming in, but also more dollars going out in cash, which aren't in the calculation.
Okay.
So the reserves really kind of play an equalizing effect on that coverage, but under what they've agreed to do, the city, you gotta hit 120 or you're gonna have problems with your bond holdings.
And so for the past 10 years, it's never been below that 140%.
Right, I think it may have been below before that. If we looked at the prior 10 years, I think there was a point in time where it was under. But that's just my recollection.
I think it came, I think 143 was,
That's
2014.
possible, yep. So the suggestion is, and in the past, the rate's been calculated with that one, it was actually last year, the rate was calculated with a 175. And there's reasons for it, to fund cash capital and things of that nature. So this is just kind of an overarching, they've agreed to it. What do we suggest they do as a minimum? Meet your requirements with a margin of error theoretically. The second, so that's a totally mandatory minimum of 1.2 per the bond covenants, or 120%. The bond reserve fund, this is dollars that have to be set aside for the revenue bonds. So when you issue a revenue bond, there's a requirement that you have dollars set aside, and they are restricted, shown as restricted on the financial statements, of various calculations. And so the proposal will meet those requirements in red, that the reserve bank account balances funded through the rate revenue of restricted cash and investments equal to or lesser of XYZ, and it's 10% of the amount of principal outstanding or the highest annual debt service requirement on outstanding bonds. So that's something that's not negotiable. It is already been agreed to in the bond covenants. So the bondholders can hold them, the city, to do that. So we're just meeting that requirement. Now, there was discussion, and I want to make sure this is understandable. In the past, this reserve has been taken out of the bond proceeds. You issue a $30 million bond, you might have to put aside $1.5 million until the bonds are paid. And so those dollars, $1.5 million, are bond proceeds, and they are rate of return restricted because of arbitrage rules. You can't issue a bond and then earn more money on the proceeds than you're paying. And there's other factors in there, such as if you do it quickly, you can, and et cetera, et cetera. But the thought is, should these reserves be funded with rates, use the proceeds of the bond to do more projects, so just basically moving dollars, because then we could earn 5.5% versus 1.5% on those dollars. That is not within this policy, but it was a discussion, and it might make sense to do so. In the short run, you would put more proceeds into capital, but you would have to fund those reserves with operating dollars. And perhaps it's done over time with the next bond issuance, we do that and we leave the old ones as is. It was a general discussion. It makes logical sense because right now you're sitting on dollars earning 1% or 1.5% or whatever the rate restriction is for purposes of arbitrage, when you could be earning 5%. But the policy would be just basically to meet the bond covenants for this one. The next one, operation and maintenance fund. The first black portion says you need to put aside enough dollars for the next month's operation. And the amount you think is logical. So you could get away with saying we're only gonna have 1 month sitting there. The policy has been historically to have 3 or 9 months worth of reserves for purposes of cash flowing capital projects, cash flowing capital grant stuff, cash flowing, even, repairs or what have you. And so the 270 days is 9 months, and that is consistent with what was being done in the past. And that's what the committee suggested the target be. The bond interest and redemption fund, this is a non-negotiable item. The third or fourth item down, this is the reserve that's required per the bond covenants. The covenants basically say you need to set aside 1 month's worth of interest every month, and they pay interest every 6 months. So in the 6th month, you use those dollars set aside to pay the debt service on interest. You need to set aside 1/12 of the bond principal payment, and then when you get to the 12th month, you make the payment with those dollars. Does that logically make sense or understandable? So you're basically cash funding each month's payment up until you have to make it, and on that date, you would have 0 left. And so that basically the suggested policy is just to follow the bond covenant. So of the 4 we've looked at so far, only 1 is really up to us. Theoretically, I guess 2 is, the first one and the third one. And then the last reserve was, it's not an amount of dollars that will be there at the end of a given year. It's how much cash or how much capital should the city be financing with cash. So we'll set the rates so that we can fund a portion of capital. I believe Steve had noted, I think it was up 6% in the last calculation. And so those dollars come in and go right back out theoretically in a given year. And to put some guardrails on this, how should it be calculated? And basically, it should be the rate revenue necessary to fund up to 15% of capital in the coming year. And so there was a replacement and improvement fund, and then there was a balance of funds. Those are basically 0 going forward. That construction fund is consistent with 6% last year. We're saying as part of this policy, it could be up to 15%. Let's say you have a light year. It might make sense to fund more cash rather than going to the bond market or what have you. But it's up to the city as part of the rate making process, and the UPC on the approval of the rate making process, there's a range, 0 to 15%.
So that's setting a limit at 15%. Is there a situation where 25% would be desirable?
You could, for the purpose of discussion, I think right now, we're really spending a lot of dollars in capital. Our capital program, as published, is anywhere between $26 and $30 million a year, not including DWSRF, which ranges from another 20 to up to $100 million per year. So those are very large capital programs. If we get to a period in time after lead services are completed, after most of the PFAS work is completed, and we're able to reduce that annual capital rate to 15%, may be a smaller number, and it may be something that the UPC may want to consider, 15%. If we go back 10 or more years ago, we were spending $3 to $5 million a year in capital. Now, that was probably somewhat understated, but given those numbers back then, something above 15% probably wouldn't be unattainable, but it does, one thing to keep in mind is that creates a direct rate relationship. So that for every additional percent that you put in, it's essentially a percent rate increase.
And I think 15% as a max is a reasonable policy that, let's say there's something comes about that, we want to do something other than this, the policy could be changed. But at this point, it really just puts, let's put a cap on what it could be.
Is there a relationship between, because right now, a lot of the capital improvement is being funded by borrowing. And this is cash, right?
Correct.
Yep.
So if for whatever reason, the interest rates go up and there's less money available, or we've been successful 20 years from now in the capital plan, so there's less to do, there's less borrowing, means that 15% gets smaller.
Right.
Or maybe that's just something you deal with 15 years from now.
Right,
So
right.
if the landscape has changed, and I guess it is a policy, so.
Yeah, and so at least it puts
Well, I guess, Peter, if you don't mind, I'd like to step in here a little bit too. Just looking at general municipal policy, you want the people that are using the system to pay for it, and since a majority of capital assets from the system last 25, 50, even up to 100 years, you want to have those users that are around paying for it. So that's why, 15, 20% is a common number to use for this, where if we're bonding for those capital improvements, the people that will be using them will be paying for them as they use them, versus putting that burden on today's ratepayer and alleviating the future ratepayer.
That makes logical sense.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
great. Thank you, Steve. The next page of this document is a summary. So the last two, the balances are zero. But the next page of the document is just a summary of what the policy we would propose is. So it's the red portion brought over from the previous page. And then the next page of the document makes a calculation of how many dollars this represents. So in the calculation process, there's the annual operation and maintenance expense at $17 million. That is the calculation of, the definition is on actually the next page of how that balance is calculated. And then we say there's an operation and maintenance fund requirement of 75%. That is $12.9 million in cash and investments. There's a bond reserve fund, that's $5.5 million. There's a construction fund, it shows a zero up above, because at the end of any point in time, it will be zero. It's calculated below that cash capital of $2.33 million. And then up above, we have the bond and interest redemption and the construction funds. So the bond reserve is legally required, and the calculation was $5.5 million. the bond and interest redemption was calculated and it's required, that's $2 million. The construction fund represents unexpended bond proceeds. So bonds were issued, not fully expended, and those dollars are restricted for capital. So they won't be there theoretically after $20 million worth of projects are completed. But at that point, another bond probably will be issued. And then that cash and investment in the middle column at $12.9 million, that's that 9-month period worth of operating reserves that will be there theoretically indefinitely. And so if you walk through this calculation up above, you would see that the requirement was $12.9 million, and at the end of 2022, which all of these balances are from the audit from 2022 with the exception of that bottom calculation, we would have been short $1 million, which is less than 10% of the total. And in any given year, these rate calculations are projections. And so we might be above, we might be below, but we're setting targets. And historically, targets have been set, it just hasn't been well-defined why. Which hopefully this provides a concise, this is what the UPC would suggest for the water utility financial policy used in rate calculations to the city commission. And the next page, if you look to the far right, about midway down, you're going to see the $17.287 million, very farthest column, about midway down. That's the balance, the calculation of what the operating and maintenance expenses are. So it's backing out depreciation because it doesn't impact cash. It's impacted by the pension and other post-employment benefit non-cash transactions. So if you compare it to the financial statements, it's a different balance, but it's defined. How is it calculated? It's using this methodology that the city uses each year in the calculation of their coverage. And then the next page is just the capital budget that's used for purposes of identifying what would be the current capital replacement and improvement fund dollars collected and expended in a given year. And that would be the 0 to 15%. So perhaps we say, let's keep that capital and replacement component low this year so that we could fund the bond reserves with rates and expend the bond reserves and get out from under the arbitrage rate restrictions, theoretically. So there's options there, but there's also a broad conceptual framework that can be modified. And I'm sure there's more to it, so I would also ask for any of the participants in the discussions and how we pulled it together to tone in, and it can be modified. But this is where we've landed at this point. And it will become important when we have the rate folks start to compile the information from the city to give them some definition. But it's very consistent with what occurred in the past.
I think that was a good explanation, Peter.
Thank you. And so how should we proceed, Jeff? Would this be something we would suggest that the city, do we do a motion to say we have updated the utility financial policy for water, and we would like to bring that to the city for their consideration in updating their policy? We have input into it, but it doesn't say, how do we address it? It's still a city decision, I believe.
I think a motion from the UPC, basically, recommending these changes that are presented here, on July 11th.
Okay.
In the memo, and that they be incorporated into the city's financial utility policy.
Okay.
So it says that there's a bond ordinance, so you're gonna have to make a bond or an ordinance change.
No, these are within it, so they're lower. In no case are we changing what's in the ordinance. We're in excess of it or meeting it.
Steve, do you have anything else on this?
So,
Nothing else that I think needs to be added right now. I think we're well explained by Peter.
so the proposed policy refers to Appendix A a couple of times.
That would be those attachments that are with it.
Okay,
Probably what we should do is just label them, but it's these documents that are with it.
okay,
We just didn't get to that point.
okay. And when that happens, I think it might help to put some notes on those examples in Appendix A that say this is, highlight the number, this ties to this one,
Sure,
this ties
sure.
to this one.
What we could do is we could allow everyone to digest this, and I could update for those items and bring it back. And then it would be done and ready for the city, and I don't think that the rate consultant, and correct me if I'm incorrect, James or Jim, that it would be something that's time critical as far as this meeting, that having these policies, in 6 weeks would be sufficient, because it will take some time for the city to do this. Do you have any thoughts?
I would agree, Peter.
Okay.
We're just, as you know, we're just starting to get going here on kind of the next water rate study. Yeah, I think 6 weeks, it will become time critical at some point as we get closer to the end, finalizing our analysis. But yeah, I think your approach and, if we could if we have something that, ultimately the city has blessed, that we can incorporate in the rate study, that would be great. Sooner rather than later, but sooner doesn't mean tomorrow.
Would that make sense to you, Libby?
Yes,
So basically, the city will get not the first page, I mean, they can, but really the policy, and then with the references to the components,
okay.
I think. Rather than, it may confuse them to give them the front, the first read and whatever.
We'll take the whole package and,
Okay,
we'll do what we need to do with it to get the final adoption of it.
okay. Well, does it make sense for us to approve it now with Steve putting the references in here?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that would expedite the process, as long as you're okay with that, Steve, like the appendix. I don't think it's a big job.
No, I'd be happy to do that.
So I would make a motion that the UPC approve the utility financial policy as presented with references, and propose this utility financial policy be approved by the city commission for purposes of rate setting. A lot of words, but I hope I got enough there.
Support.
There's a motion by Peter, support by David, to recommend the utility financial policy that's proposed for water, as stated.
There you go. I stated.
Further discussion.
I just want to say thanks for all the great work on this. Appreciate it. Yeah, a lot of detail.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 6-0 and 1 absent. Good.
Yeah.
It's been a 6-month endeavor this year. So
Yeah.
But one good thing that we've taken off the list, you know,
Yeah,
so
and-
we've knocked a lot of things off the list, so that's great.
Yeah, and really great collaboration on that one. Next item is the capital improvements, 6B. And we do have a proposed project in Comstock called Carriage Estates. And just in a very quick nutshell, the capital improvement plan is working, the city is working to implement the proposed capital improvement plan project for completing the water loop on ML Avenue, Comstock. And this relatively small neighborhood is adjacent to that water line, and Comstock has asked the UPC to consider whether UPC would support that extension through the neighborhood. So this triggers that policy guidance that the UPC adopted in May. And so we need to walk through this, and I think James and Tom have been more involved in the details in this, so I'll turn it over to you.
Go ahead, Tom.
So this is Comstock, this is a gentleman that called in a year ago, as a resident and asking for water to be extended to Carriage Estates, which is along ML Avenue. ML Avenue is slated for a capital improvement program, extension next year on the books, right?
Yeah, I believe it, either the engineering starting next year or the project starting next year. And I know we've got Anna on the line. Anna can probably confirm when the system side of that is planned for construction.
Yeah, so currently we are under contract for design, and we've got a tentative schedule of design of either 25 or 26.
And then when would you expect construction, Anna, based on that engineering and permitting schedule?
I apologize. Tentative schedule for construction is 25 or 26.
Okay.
Design is ongoing.
Okay. Thank you.
So we have some time to go through this. This is our first go-through for this neighborhood policy. And so Brett from the township called and said, can we get an estimate? And sort of a sketch of what it would look like, so that he can request that to the policy. And as we were putting that together, a few questions came up, and just, I guess, from three things. Is we had indicated in the policy that mandatory connection will not be required, but the neighborhood connection fee at the time in effect at the time the connection will be due. So we just sort of thought through that. What happens is we're gonna put together a petition that the neighborhood has to come in and say, we want it, 50% of the people in this neighborhood are interested in water. And then it goes to the UPC, UPC looks at it, says, yep, looks good, and then it gets in the capital improvement plan. Well, when they're doing the petition, if it's non-mandatory connection, everybody's gonna, 90% of people will say, yeah, that's great. But likely, a few of them will connect. Now, the gentleman that called in will connect, I would guess. But notwithstanding the quality of the water might be terrible, and maybe everybody connects, but just if the water quality is somewhat decent, I would guess that you're not gonna get a lot of connections. You may not get any future connections if wells are still allowed to be drilled. I did talk to Lucas Poles at this health department, and his sense is that most people, even if there's water main in the street and they have the option to drill a new well, they'll drill a new well. So with this policy, we're potentially building public water in the neighborhoods and not getting connections for decades. You will get the payback in the future at the time when that cost goes up. But we just wanted to sort of gave me pause that the system is investing in these neighborhoods. They're already investing because they're subsidizing the construction. But then the payback, the small part of payback that would happen is then just getting kicked further down the road. And I just, before we send the petition out, I just wanted to have, I guess, reconfirm that decision that we made. Again, because if no mandatory connection, they're gonna sign up. If it's mandatory connection, you're never gonna get a petition. If it's, you have to connect when your well fails, I don't know where that's gonna go. And you may not get them, you might get them. Because the well failing is such a future expense, it's not real. So I think we need to talk about that. Another part of it is there's a disconnect between the people. So this is a small neighborhood. There's 22 homes in the neighborhood, and probably 6 with the maps in here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 along ML, and then 22 in the neighborhood and north of it. So there's if we move forward, the people on ML Avenue, when they connect, will pay a system connection fee of $6,000, system capacity buy-in fee of $1,175, and a $60 deposit. So $7,235. The next door neighbor, who's in the neighborhood, will then pay $7,000 for the neighborhood policy in today's number, $1,175 system capacity buy-in fee, and $3,000 to make the connection from the curb box to the home. So that's how much it costs then for them to connect. So it's $11,235. So there's a difference there. I just wanted the UPC to be aware of that, because there could be pushback, and especially this goes to the townships, because the supervisors are gonna be getting the call saying, hey, he's getting it for $7,000. It's not unusual that there's a disparity in how much people pay for sewer or water. I'm gonna use the sewer as an example, because I'm more familiar with it, because water has been worked. The city has worked with water for much longer, but there are instances, and let's go through sewer. Same thing, you run sewer down ML Avenue, and the township does it to get to a development down the street. Non-mandatory connection, then those people along the line will pay the ordinance rate. And the ordinance rate is generally less than the market rate. So the ordinance rate for along the main is gonna be, I don't know, $12,000. If the people in the neighborhood do a special assessment district, they pay for everything. And those dollars for a special assessment district for, an average neighborhood for sewer is gonna be $20,000. So there is precedence for there being a difference depending on where you are, where you come in the process. So there is that precedence on the sewer side. The water's been a little bit different. Because there hasn't been neighborhoods coming in saying we want water. I can't remember the last.
Only under emergency expansions, Cooper
Emergency
and
expansions.
Richland townships.
Superfund.
So
Yeah, and the Cal landfill.
those two issues, because what we need to do is put this together, this this petition, it's an advisory petition, it's not a legal petition, it's not for a special assessment district, it's just an advisory petition, so the people in Carriage Estates can come to us and say, we want water, we get 51%, we want water, then we look at it and say, that doesn't make sense. Actually, we need to get that turned around. Before we go out and do petitions, we wanna say, yeah, that sort of makes sense if you can get 51%.
There might be two approvals, like a
Yeah.
preliminary support and then an official request from their Comstock Township Board.
Yeah.
And an official, I think there's two.
So, two issues to talk about, and then we can talk about the process, and just so we get the process right as well. So, do we want to, let's talk about the mandatory connection. Again, the initial policy was no mandatory connection. But we do have two townships that have mandatory connection.
Cooper
ordinances.
and Oshtemo have, when a well fails and there's municipal water available and it's not greater than 200 feet to access that water, there's a mandatory connection requirement.
So then we want everybody to be in the system to have the same ordinance. Do we get rid of their mandatory connection?
Yeah, I think, if I recall correctly, when we were pulling this together initially, there was a lot of consideration on those future connections and those mandatory connections, if well out and water main available within 200 feet, seemed to make sense and seemed to support the neighborhood policy. Looking at the neighborhood policy without a future well out requirement, really is not in favor of the system. That kind of supports us just bearing dollars.
Financially or operationally.
Right, as we see if people
Stagnant
don't
water,
connect, we
yeah.
have challenges with water quality.
And that determination would be each participant having to have something in place, correct? So Oshtemo has a policy, but it's not like we can say, now everybody has to have a policy.
Well, if we decide as a UPC that it would be in the best interest of the system, that there is mandatory connection when the well goes out, then Comstock, Kalamazoo Township, Texas Township will have to adopt an ordinance that says that,
You're saying if we support it with that contingency?
yes.
So there's legal questions here.
Because right now, we got two things going on. We got mandatory connection on 2, no mandatory connection on 3. So we're a little bit disjointed.
So
from that
Comstock
standpoint.
does have it?
No,
No, okay.
The only two that have it
And the
are,
project's in Comstock.
yes.
so I think one of the things, we talked about this earlier, is, maybe taking this back to the regional commission, planning committee, and asking them for their input, because they're the ones that are on the front line of this with their residents. And I agree with James, I think that pure, no mandatory connection is not necessarily in best interest from the city financially or operationally. I didn't even think operationally.
Right.
But financially, if most people don't connect when they have to drill a new well, that's gonna be generational. So you could have these 22 people back in this neighborhood and 150 years from now.
Yeah.
You got 10 of them connected.
Zero sense to do it.
Yeah,
Right.
so,
But regardless, this pipe's going down the main road.
On ML,
So
correct,
there's
yes.
6 houses that they could just connect at will,
If,
based on the policies and.
if they
rates.
wanted to.
Yeah.
With the type of line that's going on ML is a transmission.
Okay,
And with transmissions, we don't automatically connect folks. So like when we went down 33rd Street, there's 0 people connected to it, and we ran 0 yard services. And we can update our design, if by the time this goes in the ground, if this neighborhood if we're moving forward with this, we'll put those yard services in. But conventionally speaking,
Okay,
uh,
that's great
a-
for me to know, yeah.
a roadway like this, a road commission, major arterial or primary roadway, as they call it, primary roadway, that has transmission, we're just gonna run the transmission.
So without us taking any action, those folks really wouldn't have any opportunity to connect?
Not unless an individual, property owner contacted us and said, hey, gonna well out, I know there's a main out there, can I connect? And we would consider that with our existing appendix D
Okay.
prices, and then, have them submit an application, and we connect them that way.
So, but you would, in all likelihood, connect them.
Correct, yeah.
But that would be their choice, regardless of whether their well goes out. Right. They could drill a new well. They just pay the fees at the time,
Unless the township adopts that.
unless the township adopts that, yeah. And also a public policy thing is it's in the best public policy not to have 1 million individual wells
Yeah.
in the ground, because that is a vector for contamination of the groundwater. So, I mean, it's not huge, but it's there.
Question for you, James, that with that new customer deposit, what does that represent? Is that something that they pay you a deposit, you do the work, and then they pay their bill and they get it back? Or is that so they pay their bill, or what? That's at your discretion, right? Or-
Yeah, so we do have payment plans available for, the service connection, so that's the $6,000 and the system capacity buy-in fee, so that kind of the customer's cost to connect and go in service, roughly $7,100 or $7,200. We do offer payment plans for that, so you could come sign up and start,
Yeah.
a payment plan for that 36-month, payment plan. So that is an option for customers, so that they don't have to write the check for the entire, $7,200 amount all at once. And we have customers that some prefer to do that, some prefer to go in the payment plan.
What is so it says new customer deposit, $60?
Yeah, well, so what is that amount?
Yeah, yeah.
That's the meter deposit, so that's,
Okay.
once everything is all done, you pay that, and then it goes onto it basically goes onto your bill. And so if you pay all your bills on time for, I believe, a 2-year period, then we'll credit that amount back to your account,
Okay.
and then
Makes sense,
it will
yeah.
offset your bills.
Okay.
But if you're late on a bill, that's
Yeah,
gonna go.
yeah, just to assure they're
yeah.
gonna make payment.
Correct.
And so this project to do that neighborhood, I just wanted to point out, Tom, you have like a estimated pricing, and it looks like it's about, maybe, I would say, $600,000.
Yep.
And if everybody connected, you get back,
154.
So
so that's a pretty big investment to, just theoretically, so everybody's aware of it, it's a pretty big investment to put pipe in the ground if people aren't connecting.
And it's,
Yeah.
and that's the question.
Right, well, I know when we talked about this initially, I had some of the same type of questions, but this is helpful to see it in real life, in that, just to take a step back, I mean, we're talking about expansion of the water system into pre-existing neighborhoods that are non-emergency related. So, so you start at that, then if we don't, again, I completely agree that if we don't have a mandatory hookup, then the township should have, the ordinance that says when the wells go out, you have to hook up. I mean, otherwise, to your point, otherwise we're putting pipe in the ground that nobody may hook up to, in theory. And so James and I were talking about this a little bit, you look at a little bit of extremes, like, we could end up having zero, in theory, you could have zero participation after you put all this brand new pipe in, so you don't want that. My initial thought when we were doing the policy was, when we had the petition idea is to have 51%, I would take that next step further, and maybe this goes to your second petition, 51% financial commitment. whether that is, you know, a special assessment by a township or a special assessment by the water system. But, I mean, we won't proceed until we, in effect, have a commitment for 50% sign up. And once we get that, then we start moving forward, and at that point, we could still have a situation where we envision where, okay, maybe not everybody is hooked up, but we're okay with, you know, 50% of the residents hooking up, because, you know, we do think that over time, others will.
Does that require a change in the policy we approved, Tom? Or is that something that'd be contrary to it, or?
Yeah, I mean, right now, it's just no mandatory connection. So that's what we approve.
Right, and does it say 51%?
Yeah, I mean, over 50%.
That want it, but it doesn't say anything about are gonna pay for it.
Right, right.
So does that need to change in the policy that we won't consider putting it in unless there's a 51% commitment?
My only hesitancy there is, I think if you are getting 51% of the people to say, I wanna connect, and I would guess that would be even within some time frame, you're never gonna get that petition. I think it's gonna be difficult enough to get a 50% petition with the arbitrary, I have to connect when my well fails someday. That's a big enough lift. I think that if you tie it to I gotta pay today for a well that I have, and I'm not paying monthly bills, that's not gonna happen. So I think we wanna find the middle ground where we're not stuck with all that pipe in one connection. But then you got all these neighborhoods that you could serve and you can't, because it's in the interest of the system to have more connections and to have less wells in the ground.
I like the terminology system being used for the following, for consideration. So we're looking at a policy that if we don't get a financial commitment except for a 51%, hey, I want this, but no guarantee to get return on investment, that means the likes of Texas Township, Oshtemo, Cooper residents will pay for pipe that sits in the ground that no one connects to. Maybe this policy has to also include at least the $7,000 for the neighborhood on a 20-year assessment from the township's commitment, so that at least there's some return on that investment there. And then, or along with a when the well fails mandatory connection, not expanding the system to help one who has and as a water operator, I love some of these terms, aesthetically pleasing or not type of water. So we're outside of the realm of this an emergency. It's not a health hazard, but it's an aesthetics issue for 51% of the neighborhood. So 11 houses, 12 if we're counting 22, right? So there has to be some balance for buy-in as well, that pipe's there. And, you know, if you consider that you're paying for it to be there when your well fails. So we're not telling you have to abandon your well today, but when it does fail, or the next homeowner, if it's not the current, at least a 20-year assessment, 10-year, let the townships decide what they would like to do. You know,
So you're suggesting that they pay for it regardless? We will force this water down your throat?
if I'm not saying we're forcing it down their throat, Peter, I'm saying if the system as a whole is gonna invest 60% of the cost in an existing neighborhood.
Yeah.
Mr. Chamberlain, who lives in, you know, Core City, Kalamazoo, should not have to pay for in his rates.
I understand what you're
That
saying,
stagnant pipe sitting there
I
that
just want-
adds maintenance for the system user.
I totally get it, but I just want to understand what you're saying. You're saying we would do it if they put an assessment in place on all these properties.
If the individual doesn't wanna pay, if the township, I think it also comes at
Really,
the,
like, you get it, and here's your charge.
So,
But you're getting it
Would that
if
be
you're,
a sad
but you're
for
getting it if you're having
that whole
over
area?
51% of the people in the
for the
neighborhood
7,000.
I get it.
verbally stating they're favorable
Percent
for it.
Get those passed.
You'd have, you're right, for a SAD, you'd have to have 51% for that.
Which is
Right.
also-
So it might make it difficult to ever do it, Tom.
Yeah, and it's never gonna happen, because then you're not gonna get 50% of the people in there to say, go ahead and assess me for something I'm gonna use down the road.
Or I may not use because I choose to move.
Yeah,
So I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think I heard you propose, Tom, that petition, that this policy asked for, would ask for 51% commitment to connect when their well fails? Is that
Yeah.
what you're
Yeah.
saying, that we'd have a majority that would agree to that?
well, but I think has to go to a township attorney, and I'm not an attorney, but I think that would then, because it's in, we'll use Comstock as an example, I don't think you can, I don't know if it's gotta be a township-wide ordinance.
Yeah, it's gotta be an ordinance or a SAD without either one of those, cause, you got people that move out. I'm a new property owner, I didn't sign any, or, I'm not,
How do you make
I
an
got a well.
agreement with just those 22
Exit
people?
restriction?
right, so without an ordinance or a SAD, we don't have the legal boundary in place to hold that requirement. Oh, that was, I didn't sign that, that was my wife, we're divorced,
And we had a subcommittee for the neighborhood policy, and it included Tim Hudson. So he's been involved in the detail on this, and he's got something he wanted to.
And I appreciate the short conversation, but I was involved in when we drafted a lot of this and coming up with it. And I like where you're going with it, and I agree with everything you're saying, I agree with Tom, you're gonna have a tough time getting 50% out of this neighborhood, regardless probably. Even though I think the rates are more competitive with a well rate today, what we're showing with the investment the system's making, right or wrong. But I just wanted to comment, so I agree with your conversation. I know Comstock did have a mandatory hookup thing. We couldn't get, as Tom mentioned, a water assessment district with a mandatory, people say, I don't want to drink that water. But when their well fails, they typically, if the rates are right, they'll hook up. I heard some number from the city, 70% of them won't do it. But you'd have to look at what the rates were at that time too, compared to a price of a well. But the only thing I want to discuss too, and I don't know if the city has a mandatory hookup, I have a feeling this may have to run it by our regional commission attorney too. This may require, if we decide to go to a mandatory connection ordinance, contract change. Didn't have that in the contract, townships would have to do this to have new customers. So I just want to make you aware of that. That may take that change as well. But good discussion. I appreciate it.
We do have a contract, wellhead protection ordinances. I think that's in there. So I mean, this could be a similar,
Yeah, it'll be a similar type change, and then it's gonna be up to each township and the city. I don't know if the city has a mandatory connection. It'd have to be the same because we're planning on the same services.
The wellhead,
for the system again, to put in $600,000 worth of pipe, you wouldn't want it to sit unused for 20 years. So that doesn't make any sense for the system. You also wouldn't want a whole bunch of people that came in and said, yeah, we really like this idea, please go ahead and do it. And then when it goes in, they're like, well, but we don't wanna pay right now, so that doesn't make any sense either. So, I mean, we keep coming back to it, it does make sense if people really want it and they're willing to pay for it. Or, and even if the system's willing to, in effect, subsidize a big part of it. So if the system's willing to subsidize a big part of it, will you, as a neighborhood or a township, commit to the other part of it? And then we'll move forward with this project. I mean, that just seems like a logical and fiscally prudent way to pursue any type of project like this.
But that would apply to everybody along ML Avenue as well.
Yeah.
The well fails, they have to hook up. So it's everybody. I don't think you can adopt an ordinance just for the neighborhood.
yeah, it's true, I mean, you end up with a mandatory connection ordinance in the 3 big townships. I mean, Kalamazoo Township probably doesn't they're probably mostly connected. But there will be offsetting revenues coming in from those people along the existing pipe that's out there that don't have to connect today, that will have to connect when their well fails, so.
So how do we proceed? Is that, you go to the regional commission and get their input on?
Well, I think the UPC needs to, we need to come to a conclusion on what we think would be good policy. And if that includes mandatory connection in the townships, then we kick it to the regional commission and then have them talk about it. If they're unwilling to do the mandatory connection as we talked about, or whatever we come up with, then maybe then we decide what the policy needs to be there, because then you have differing mandatory connections versus non-mandatory connections out there. That may change how we view it.
Doesn't that conflict in the first place? Because most of the townships have to adopt the city of Kalamazoo's water ordinance anyway. So if it actually became city of Kalamazoo's,
They don't have to adopt the ordinance, they have to adopt an ordinance with, no, the water's different.
Yeah, so we've got, different chapters, so wellhead protection's a
Right.
different chapter from the water ordinance itself. So there is some flexibility. Another comment I had, perhaps to give the UPC some more flexibility, would be to require, or to consider to require townships, to have a mandatory connection ordinance only if they want to participate in the neighborhood connections. That way you've got, we do have some less developed townships that this is just not in their future plan within the next 25 years. But some are on that cusp of wanting to connect, so maybe having that option is not an all or nothing, there is a little bit of flexibility with that.
And then the other thing is talking about the total cost of this. Again, I'll look at Anna and Mark. I don't think there's a groundswell of people out there that have availability to water that are like, we really want to have water in our neighborhood because they've been there. And they haven't asked for it. Nobody's asking for it. This one guy's asking for it. And we're assuming that they really need it. So I think that the risk to the system of spending millions of dollars is pretty low. And we have the ability to pace that out too. We can put it in the capital improvement plan where we want, just do one neighborhood per year until 30 years from now, they're all done. So that the financial shock to the system could be lessened.
How many, in your estimate, just a rough estimate, how many neighborhoods like this are there?
I should
Does
have
this
looked.
represent like 5%?
We did that in the capital
or-
improvement plan,
Yeah, we've got spreadsheets of it, maps of it,
Oshtemo, there's a bunch, but they're small. Comstock's got Shields, and that's a big one, that's one neighborhood, it's
There's something
huge.
to consider is the older plants have the smaller lots with more septic tanks and more wells. And they really don't have a room for another well.
So
They can be forced into a situation where they can't drill a new well by the health department because they can't meet the setback requirements from everything else that's on the property.
it's not an overwhelming number. I think Comstock, other than Shields, has 2 others.
Yeah, it's not a lot.
Texas has probably mostly been putting in water as they go.
Yeah.
They've got maybe 2 or 3.
Has something changed at the health department? Because they used to deny well permits when public water was available.
They, the health department doesn't have, the authority to deny. They try to work with the townships. They try to send the person back to the township
That
to.
has changed.
On the sewer side, that's true, but on the water.
Good conversation. There's a serious issue as a utility person. I echo the utility people here. It really is a disservice to the rest of the customers if the utilities bypass the people that need to be served, but they don't have to connect to the service. And I'll just give a broad example that's probably gonna happen more and more as public health and water quality requirements get more strict and more stringent. I have commented to Oshtemo that they have a problem because of their groundwater contamination. We have this huge water infrastructure because of the landfill. I mean, I think the township should seriously consider changing their zoning because they need customers to support this elaborate extension out to the west. And it's all rural, large lot, if even that, residences. That's gonna be a burden for the life of the system until it develops, quite frankly. And the rest of the ratepayers are paying for that. And you're having more and more groundwater contamination, you're going out and servicing it. And if you don't have the customers, these large pipes are a capital burden that you're just gonna have to keep raising your fees and raising your fees to pay for it. So it's a hard question. And if you have to finance it through special assessment districts that are voted on, you're gonna have a problem. And maybe you need to look at that a little bit differently as to how you finance them. But it's a serious issue and I don't envy you having to struggle with it. Thank you.
I would just add, there are benefits to the extension. Automatically, even if the property owners don't connect, they get fire protection service, which improves their insurance rates. And they have water service, they continue to have water service even when they lose their power, so there are benefits. But having walked through the fire at Oshtemo on sewer issues, even with the benefits, the cell is like impossible to get everybody. And we're working, I mean, we generally understand the utility, the municipal service that it provides, and the decision to go municipal service was made 100+ years ago in most of these situations. I mean, you're just still working with that same system and that same decision that in the late 1800s they decided to put public water in. You're just kind of slowly building and expanding it.
So again, I think the two big questions are, do we require a minimum financial commitment on a neighborhood to start proceeding in a project? And the second is, is there a mandatory hookup for when wells fail for other properties that are adjacent? Those are those are both really huge questions for the residents and the township board.
And I'm hearing that the mandatory connection when a well fails is the vehicle to get that financial commitment that's being proposed.
I would disagree with that. Just in that, again, you could theoretically have the situation where you could have, everybody has perfectly fine wells and you have a new pipe and nobody's connected for the next 25 years. Is the extreme.
So I support the mandatory connection when a well fails, but I don't support the financial commitment up front, just because I don't know how that would work. Couldn't do an assessment district. And it would kill the projects. You'd never do this.
And my argument back is, what is the project then, though? It's putting pipe in the ground for no reason that increases decreases cost long-term, that gets back to Jeff's point of 20, 25 years, it could sit there and nobody connected to it. And that cost is bore in rates by everybody else outside of that neighborhood. That's a struggle I have, and, you know, of any of this, expansion without 51% return on the investment. And I know I might kill it, but is it really a project then? So this is the key. It's not a direct emergent health issue. It's maybe one or two people in the back of a neighborhood with a desire to change in aesthetics with their personal well. So that's the piece that I struggle with. But I do think from looking at it as a system as a whole across the board, what James raised earlier about, you know, mandatory connect at a township level, you know, to participate in these type of neighborhood policies is better than a broad stroke across the board. Mandatory connection if your well fails, with the example of the ML, the transmission main. Until, you know, now we get to what Mark raised a few minutes ago, until we're dealing with environmental issues on the impact of groundwater. So it's not an easy fix today. And it's not gonna be an easy fix for a while for any of us, but you know, we're here to talk about rates too, and if we're gonna invest money and not get return back on it, and others who are not using what we invested are paying for in a rate aspect, I don't think that's a wise decision at this table.
One question. Not all, but some of the lending institutions, if there's sewer available, will at the time of sale of a property, will require that property to connect to that municipal sewer before they will.
A mortgage?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's not every lending institution, so you can't really count on it, but is that the situation for municipal water if it's available? Does anybody know?
It can be. You know, It's up to the lender can.
Yeah, and that's a good time to get connections because like a friend on 10th Street sold and they were required and the buyer and seller split the cost then. And they got the money flowing right then to do that. I wish all the banks did that.
I'd go to a different bank if you didn't want to do it. You know, that may be.
That's possible, yep.
It might be
Yeah.
like if you go through federal whatever, you know, because there's a lot of different organizations, Jenny Mae and Fannie Mae, and I would suspect that those may require it. And if you went to, you know,
Recognize Peter. that-
Kalamazoo Credit Union or something,
What's
it might
that?
be different.
But I'm familiar with sewer, but I don't know about water.
On the
That's-
sewer side, it's because the bank owns the house really, right? That there's potential for groundwater contamination when they buy it. If they're owning it and mortgaging it to the person and they start putting turpentine down them, then they've got a groundwater contamination issue that they're all mixed up. So just get it to the sewer.
Yeah. So, how do we proceed here? Do we go to the regional commission and get their insight into their thought with these concepts? I mean, this is the first time we've even considered it and we've drafted a policy.
Well, we have a policy and the policy today is non-mandatory.
Right.
Other than in the townships that have mandatory.
Sure.
So I think because all of these neighborhood connections are gonna happen in the township and the customer communities, that input from the regional commission would be helpful for us to make a decision and a final policy. Because I think if it comes back, no way, no mandatory connection, that might make our decision different than if, yeah. I'll leave it at that.
I
I have to ask one clarification because maybe I misremembered something. When you say mandatory connections, are you talking about when water's there, you have to mandatory connect, or you're saying mandatory connections like what Oshtemo has that when a well fails?
When a well fails.
When a well fails, yeah.
So those are, in my mind, are two different things.
Yeah.
We're talking about when you ladder.
Yes.
And a well failure means a new well, not a
New
pump,
permit.
not a pipe.
A
In other
new
words, if you
permit.
change a screen, that would be considered a well failure.
Whatever, it'd be triggered by a
Change a
permit.
Submergible pump, it's a well failure. You know, you're not in mind.
Ours,
You need a permit.
ours is for drilling a new well.
Yeah.
Oh, okay,
It
that's
would be,
different.
the trigger would be a,
Permit, isn't it? It's a
the trigger would be a
It says
permit.
drilling in our ordinance.
Trigger,
Trigger will be a permit to drill a new well.
yes.
Correct, but if you have a filter or a screen that needs to be replaced, you don't need a
That's-
permit.
You don't need
It's
a permit.
maintenance.
Correct, it's just maintenance, correct.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's drilling a new
Drilling
well.
a new well.
It's just like with septic, you can pump your septic tank as many times as you want and not have to get a permit.
So I would suggest that perhaps the UPC subcommittee, if needed, would send it to the Kalamazoo Regional Water Wastewater Commission Planning Committee to discuss it. That would be quicker than the Regional Commission. Their next meeting is September. So send it to the Planning Committee. They can chew on it, perhaps work with the subcommittee from the city to have some more discussion before it comes back here.
I support that.
I would just ask that they also look at the financial commitment question.
Yes,
And I'm looking at Tom's numbers, and Tom, I appreciate the spreadsheet, but even under the ideal situation for this neighborhood, the system is paying for 75% of the cost if everybody hooks up.
yeah, or 70%, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean,
That's
that's under the
huge.
ideal situation, everybody hooks up, the system is paying for 3/4 of the cost.
So it's hard to believe it. I don't see that benefit,
I know.
but it's still like an impossible thing.
Yeah.
And to me, it gets almost to an ethical question when you have plastic shields, where some people really are in a bind and a majority of neighbors don't care. And you're in this stagnant situation.
Right.
You can't get good water to somebody who doesn't have a place to put another well, and their lot is full of septic system.
And I think I just want to be clear that I think our role as a UPC is not to tell the townships what to do. And I don't think we're proposing that. It's just if you want to be part of, if they want this new program, then here's how we have to do it. But I just want to make it clear, we're not going out to any townships right now saying, we're making you hook up, we're making you have a mandatory hookup ordinance.
No, but if they choose, as James said, if we choose to do this neighborhood policy.
Right.
Likely you're gonna have a mandatory connection.
You have to bear in mind through all of this, that's everybody in the township, not just the neighborhood that has that requirement.
Yeah.
That's a little bit,
And there's some legal questions on that.
yeah, and I think maybe if I could, maybe that could be asked too as part of the planning commission, ask the legal to what it would
Yes.
take.
Yeah. Can we do that legally? Because
Yeah.
there's some, I'll put that in the minutes.
I just throw in two Comstock when I was in office, we did away with the ordinance, Mr. Sparks, at the time, the attorney, he felt that everybody has a right to that resource to drill that well. Whether they can hook that into the connection, I don't know. You have a right to those minerals under your house.
So this is really a policy of the UPC because in the contract, every member has the ability to expand. It's just how do we address the financial implications of expanding?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's, the key is they can expand, but then we're here to say how.
It gets financed.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just out of curiosity, what's it cost to punch a 100-foot well these days? Is that 10 grand? Is
It's
that?
about that, yeah. And that was sort of the idea to try to get the neighborhood policy in the same neighborhood of a well. So there's incentive for people to switch to the public system.
So at this time, we're not giving any kind of a response back to Comstock's
No.
question,
And that's
And-
okay.
and that's okay at this time.
We have time, and again, what triggered this is, we need to give details on the petition, the advisory petition. We don't wanna make this guy walk around the neighborhood with a petition that doesn't have
Check
a
yes or no
solid
box.
basis to it, because then we'll have 22 people in here at a UPC meeting pounding on the table. So, and we have time, it's 25, 26,
Are the chances of any kind of grant funding for a neighborhood expansion like this, like zero?
Well, not necessarily. I think there are options there. I think Shields Plat, that example would probably score better on a funding application. I haven't reviewed this neighborhood as thoroughly. It's so small. The benefits are.
Fifth of the houses have swimming pools in this neighborhood that we're looking at.
Right, yeah.
It doesn't look like a struggling,
It doesn't look like.
small lot neighborhood. No.
Right, yeah, it doesn't have the small lots of it, either. There are, grant and DWSRF benefits for fire protection. Usually those are, larger, so that those are point scores. If we're able to take a, community or neighborhood and increase fire protection, that's beneficial. So I wouldn't count that out. The other possibility, we still do CIA projects. We've got probably over 100 CIA projects right now, and the CIA is contribution and aid. That's where the townships pay for a portion of the project. Sometimes that's 100%, sometimes that's 1%, but they pay a portion of the project and then the project goes forward. Just looking at this plat, 27 lots, that's $189,000. So you could say, hey, township, for $189,000 CIA, you can move the project forward.
Oh, yeah, and then
The
the
township would just
connections
pay
over
that.
time go back to the township.
Correct, and there's still those 3 or 5% fees that the townships are collecting for the surcharge fees that we still do in water. That could help pay for those items. So that's all helpful discussion, I think, for regional commission as well.
and then I'll bring back at the next UPC, I'll summarize all the neighborhood projects that we submitted a year ago. I won't change the numbers, but it'll give you an idea what that scope is.
You know, as Comstock goes, this plat is a new plat.
They're just, in that's gentleman's opinion,
Sure, he needs it or wants it, that's fine. Yeah, respect that.
Okay, good discussion. Any other capital improvement program updates?
Nothing's, significant other than we've got a tremendous amount of construction currently underway in the city.
I hadn't noticed.
So that's been going on. We are planning to bring forward another phase of the construction and pipe oversizing agreement, similar to what UPC has already approved for our work that's going on around the event center. Also coordinated with Kalamazoo and Michigan Ave, constructions for those two-way street conversions. So we're kind of taking advantage right now of the work that the contractor is doing for the event center, and also taking advantage of work that's happening under the Protect grant to get some of our large transmission looping completed that connects our basically our entire low system feed to Blakesley Reservoir. We're building a dual leg for that, and that's going right through where the event center is. And so I would anticipate either August or September UPC meetings to be bringing forward another request for pipe oversizing and construction agreement to have the contractor that's doing the event center to put that pipe in for us.
Okay. you. New business, we have the quarterly reports review, and the first of those is the financial report. There's some information in the packet. Peter, you
Yeah.
typically-
So I think this is the first time that we've had these in-depth reports provided. There's a revenue and expense report. I was receiving these on a quarterly basis. And then I provided a summary in this 3-page report that we've seen in the past. And it's exactly these numbers, it just doesn't go line by line by line. But the data underlying it is this. So in my document, if you clicked on that number, it would say bang, it's wages, benefits, et cetera, et cetera. And so if you prefer to just get these, you can, or if a summary is helpful, I can do this. So I'm asking once again whether it's useful. But looking at the summary myself, I'm looking at the first page where it says City of Kalamazoo, UPC, 6/30/24 budget and actual water fund detail. And these are, on the left are the various cost centers that the city utilizes to track expenses. I just want to point out, if you work your way about halfway down, you're going to see budgeted amounts of 3 million, 27 million, 2.8 million, 76 million. That's the capital that's expected by the city, that likely a large portion won't be completed. I just want to point that out because when you look at the very top line, you see there is a budget of $147 million. We have long-term input into the capital plan, which is the big dollars. But I focus on monitoring kind of the operations, which are the lines before that area. And I was just taking a look at budget and actual and saying, okay, we're less than 50% expended on our budget for the current year, working my way down the page. And that's where I would expect us to be, because we're 6 months into the year, half of the year. And you can see for the water system, budgeted 6.2 million, we're at $2 million. Now realize there's accruals that happen, so costs get moved back into the year in which you incurred them, but I just looked at the top and said, okay, we're tracking under budget, which is better than over budget. And so someone on James' team is keeping an eye on things and tracking what's occurring. And then when I take a look at the bottom, I was looking at the revenue category, and you'll see a 44%. And that is just showing the water system, basically the charges are less than 50% at this point in time, and I would expect them to be at 50%. So expenses are under and revenues are under at this point in time. Then I turn to the next page. And I'm looking at how did we do this year versus last year. So the first column is 2024, the next column is 2023. I just find it helpful to say, where were we at 6 months last year versus 6 months this year? You can see the very top line that's not bolded. We have actual expenses for the water and sewer system, but it's just the water system. It's less than last year, which is better than being more than last year. And I wanted to point out, if you work your way down the page, you're gonna see $7 million in the 2024 column, where we're looking at WAT05 infrastructure capital improvement. So we're behind last year's capital expenditures at 6 months in. Now, is that because it's raining or what have you? But you can see, we're substantially below our budgeted amounts. And we know that we budget high because not all the projects get completed. And then I take a look at the revenue this year versus last year, and the revenue's actually up. It's just under budget. So I'm looking at that line under revenue where it says water and sewer system. You can see 2024, the revenue's actually what do we have here? 14.8 million. Last year, we were only at 12.2. So rate increases are impacting the bottom line. We're under budget. That might be because it's raining or not raining. I think that's a pretty big driver, isn't it? or not so much?
With the capital, let me speak to that
Yeah,
first. It's hard to look at capital on a per year basis. Most of these projects span 2 to 3 years. So the numbers are a little skewed when you're trying to look at it from a per annual basis. Any discrepancy between those 2 years, I think it's probably likely due to where we're at on contract. So we've got, we just awarded in July, at the July 1st City Commission meeting, another $14 million of capital that's not reflected in this report.
Yeah,
So
it's in the budget,
Right.
it's just not expended.
Yeah, so that's some of the lag there. In terms of revenue, we don't follow a linear revenue curve in terms like every month is the same amount of revenue.
Yeah.
Most of our revenue occurs between May and September.
Sure, because
that's,
watering, right?
yeah, that's when folks
Okay.
are watering. So for us to kind of align year to year, we usually like to do that after October, to start looking at one year to the next to see where they come in at.
Sure.
And so, that being said, it is a positive sign that we're up 21%, even though we only had a 6% rate increase.
Right.
And that, again, it's a non-linear revenue curve, so.
So we're under 50% of the budget because the biggest sales period is actually next quarter.
Next quarter.
Will be billed through October or what have you.
Yeah.
Sure. The last page that we have here is I take that very same data and I assigned each line item in this data a caption, and I called it capital outlay, chemicals, city internal charges, debt service. So I went through every line that's in these reports, gave it a category, and I'm just comparing it, where are we at this year versus last year for these costs. So you can see chemicals look like, or capital outlay, they're down. Chemicals, slightly down. Internal charges, slightly down, and that can be timing of when those are posted, because I'm asking for this report, 5 days after the end of the month. They might be booking stuff back, day 6. But then we say debt service, you can see that's up. Well, what have we been doing? Issuing debt. And the last category is just wages and benefits, and you can see that that's up about 6% from the year before. So it's I'm trying to bring up these big reports to a little smaller perspective that you can digest. If these reports satisfy you, this is something stock. This takes about an hour to do. If it's worth.
I think it's worth it.
Because the big reports are just, this is straight from the city system.
Yes.
So this is,
The only issue with these are they don't give you the year before, and I always find that that's kind of nice. But I mean, they're good reports and all, and I get this in Excel, I just import it into Excel, sign all these captions automatically, and then go kind of grind it out, make sure all the numbers match or whatever.
It's very
Helpful.
worthwhile, yeah.
So I will return next quarter with this information, and thank you to James for providing the information I emailed and I had it written out. This time we were able to put it in the packet.
Next item is 7.2, the consultant's billing report, quarterly report. And this is the summary requested.
Can I make one comment?
Sure.
I just want to verify that we have it. I'll follow up with my question at the next meeting, but there is a line in here that is the entire committee too for the year.
Oh,
I just didn't spot it right offhand, so I don't know, but going forward, I will point it out.
okay.
And this is for multiple years, correct? Yeah.
Yes. If we look at 24, which is the top line on each of these pages, top sub. Like we're not exceeding.
Yeah, so we're well within the I don't know what you call it, James, the process where you don't have to go out to bid within the $25,000 limit or what have you.
Yeah, yeah.
So it looks like each consultant is well within the dollar amount for 2024.
And then next is item 7.3, unless somebody has any other comment on that. The Eagle report, and James distributed these water quality reports. There are a few extra if anybody in the.
Yep, we've got these. If you're a current customer on our system, you should have received one of these in your mailbox by now. If you're not a customer of the system currently, we are gonna make these are available online, and then we'll also make these available at City Hall, and we'll be getting these out to all the townships. So we just got these, so they're kinda hot off the press. I did wanna take some time to kinda go over it with everybody's, cause there are some things that folks may have a question about. As you flip through the magazine, you've got some system information. You've got information that's educational based on water and work we're doing for wellhead protection, that sort of thing. We do have some information regarding some of our policy, including our well retention policy. That's something that often comes up, usually in the townships as we're expanding. So there is a way to keep your well if you use it for irrigation or gardening or something like that. There is a possibility there. Now turn into the centerfold with the staples. We've got our water quality information, all pretty typical. Again, a big highlight, no water quality violations. Everything here is meets EPA, Safe Drinking Water Act, Michigan Safe Drinking Water Act, which is Public Act 399, and all Michigan PFAS regulations. I do want to note that under the PFOS, which under Michigan law has a limit of 16, we are currently 6.2 for 2023 results. That's obviously well within the 20 Michigan rule, below 16, but that number is above the proposed rule for EPA in 2029. So that's not a violation, and that number will be reduced via treatment by 2029. So when 2029 gets here, we have plans in place to reduce that number through treatment. Flipping through the magazine, next page, we have received 2 reporting or sampling violations in 2023. And I'll talk through those here. Now, a reporting or sampling violation means that we either didn't report values to Eagle within a certain time frame, or we didn't collect a sample within a certain time frame. And according to Eagle rules and regulations, that's a violation. So this informs the public of what those violations were, why they occurred, and what we're doing about it. So the first one was a gross alpha sample violation. So we did not collect a sample within the period that Eagle would like it collected. We utilized the outside lab, not the Eagle lab, for that information. And so the information was reported to Eagle on time. It just wasn't sampled within the window that they would like it sampled. There was no detections within that sample. The sample was not in exceedance of any levels. It just wasn't collected within the window. And it describes when we actually got the sample and when it was turned in. The other sampling and reporting violation was our third quarter sampling for PFAS. Those results were collected on time. They were turned into the lab on time. All the results were within Michigan MCL. There's no violation there. However, the lab that we use, which was a contractual lab certified by Eagle, was later found to have violated their QA/QC procedures. Therefore, our results are not valid, and if we don't have valid results, we essentially didn't sample. So we had to resample that group and resubmit them. We no longer use that contractual lab. And that lab is working out their challenges with Eagle so that they can become recertified by Eagle. That lab was certified by Eagle at the time that we used them. They were our contract lab at the time that we used them. We had no knowledge that they were in violation of their QA/QC parameters. That did not come out later until Eagle did an investigation with them. So there was not a lot that we could have done to prevent that. We're now not working with that lab, so we shouldn't have those challenges again. So in summary, those are the 2 reporting or sampling violations that we did receive in 2023. And happy to discuss any questions anybody may have on that, Tim.
I just, when Peter was going through the budget and actual and stuff, I seen that anomaly with sampling and analysis. Is that a result of this?
Not directly, I think that's just more, so, getting to that question, we are spending more this year on sampling and analysis. We are outpacing that budget number. I think that's just, probably like a technical review. We are spending more on outside lab, we are spending more on sampling now than we had been. Some of that's just due to increased cost. That line item budget will probably increase next year. It's not uncommon for us on these, as you drill into these individual line items, that we may overspend a year or 2 in a row before we actually increase that line item. And Peter knows some of this budget, there's some budgeting things that happen, things can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. If we continue to increase budget line items, then that can have a rate impact. So we don't really like to increase budget line items unless there's a definite need to do so.
Yeah, it's not a big dollar
It's not a
number,
big
but I
dollar
just saw
amount.
the
Right.
now. And
Yep.
I thought maybe, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Any questions?
Just one comment, I mean, this is a few pages of all the work that gets done all year long.
Right,
So
just
it's
a few
really
pages,
good-
yeah.
Good job, and obviously every water system has to produce this every year. Just for the group's information, you know, we've had some media stories, and we'll probably get a couple more when this comes out about the PFAS question. And, you know, again, we keep explaining the system is within the requirements as they exist today.
Correct.
And we are making changes for the future. Yeah, but what about, is the question we get often. So just to let you know, you probably see a couple more stories here this week or next. But that's the main topic of, well, why aren't you meeting the 2029 requirements today? It's like, well, because we're working on it.
Because today we're under the law and the rules and the requirements of 2020.
Right.
No, that's a great point. We do have some media interviews scheduled with some media folks already about this report. So I would plan for and anticipate, just like Jeff stated, there's probably gonna be articles that says, who knows what they'll say, but I can show you that we meet and we are compliant with all rules and regulations today.
And that plan, that phased plan is in place because it's gonna take that long.
Correct. Some of
It's
the,
not that you don't want to do it today.
right, it's gonna take that long. Some of these plants need some very serious investment. We talk about Station 5 and Station 14, that's $51.3 million of investment. We currently have a package together submitted for DWSRF to address that. Some of these contributing numbers are from stations that are easier to fix. Central, for example, also has detectable levels of PFAS that will need to be treated to comply with 2029 regulations. That's a much simpler process. However, that's still a capital project, that's in our capital program, and it just takes time to design that and to implement it. So that's gonna involve immediate change out at Central and the introduction of granular activated carbon into our media at Central. So that's, technically speaking, that's a pretty simple process. That's a pretty simple project. We're actually taking that project and combining it with several other things that we're doing at Central. We're adding a generator We're making some other system and reliability improvements there. The city commission just approved the engineering contract for that project. That was approved, I believe, at the July 1st meeting. So that's moving forward. But these things take time to design, they take time to get the specs together to bid that out, and then they'll take a number of years to implement. So the work is planned, the work is underway, and we fully anticipate to be compliant with the regulations as they come out in 2029.
Thank you.
James, does your staff prepare this?
We work together with a printing office, so we have a printer that we use, but then we kind of put all the data together and the different things that we want it to be in there, and work with the printer to get everything to fit. It's there's a lot in here.
Yeah, I mean,
You
it looks
can,
fantastic. It looks really
read this
professional.
several times over and hit on a different topic every time, and it's something that we encourage folks to keep this around. Maybe it moves from the kitchen table, over to the somewhere in the counter, or in the pile of other things that you don't grab all the time, but keep a reference of it, because things we might go 6 months down the road, and then you may have a conversation with your neighbors, or you may see something in the media and you might have a question about that. The chances are this information may be in here, and so keep this around. It's a good resource. Yep.
It's always on the website.
It's always on the website, that's correct. It is always on the website, and if you lose yours, feel free to stop in to City Hall, and again, we're gonna get these out to all the townships as well.
Thank you. Item 7B is professional services invoice approvals, and there's one invoice for our consideration today.
I move approval of payment of the final invoice number 82576 in the amount of $97.
Support.
Motion by David Anderson, second by John Crum, to approve the plan invoice as presented. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Abstain.
Motion carries 5-0, 1 abstention and 1 absent. Okay. Committee member, alternate, attendee, and guest comments, item 8.
I wanted to communicate to you and just put it out there. I was called by Jim Bierman, who was on the Zoom or whatever. And he had suggested that perhaps I should be involved in more of the rate-making process. And I said I would broach that issue with you folks, ask James what his thoughts were, but I didn't want to commit your money, because that's what it is, to being involved in that process, unless you would like me to do that. And so I don't know if you have any insight, James, you want to share. I talked with Jim, and I understood, he said, I'll just keep you in the loop on this, and if we have a, this or that, we would have you Zoom in or whatever it might be. And so I guess I'd throw it out to James, and it's up to you folks.
Yeah, no, that's, thanks, Peter. That, Jim and I had a kind of a kickoff meeting with Danica Patrick and some members of the Stantec team on Tuesday morning. Just a real quick conversation of, what work we had planned to kind of to get underway, and what that schedule would look like. And there's going to be a document request that's going to come into Mr. Vicenzi in his office here shortly, and to just kind of get everything together, start rolling for rates. And one of the things we talked about is having more frequent check-ins and kind of reconciliation as we have some pretty substantial changes in what is happening with 24 actually, that was not necessarily anticipated in the rates, and then where we see potential changes in 25. And some big highlights, we initially did not have a FY24 DWSRF project lined up. We were not ranked in the scorable range. Eagle called back and said, well, how about $3 million grant and $7 million principal forgiveness? Would you guys take that? So it was like $11 million, you know, free and clear. Yeah, I guess. So we did it. And the city commission just approved those contracts on the first. So that's a change from what was in the program originally. Another big item is our application for over $110 million project for FY '25, which would actually start to, you'd see that in '26. So with some very big changes and stuff that's moving around and that's gonna move around, I, you know, made the request to Jim if we could have Peter kind of join us almost like a staff member would and work through many aspects of this process and be kind of with us, you know, a seat at the table, so to speak, hands on keyboard almost with the city team as we progress through that. So I would like to, you know, make that recommendation to the UPC to have Peter join us for a lot of this work. I think that'd be extremely helpful. Peter's got a great eye for, you know, where things should be with respect to the city budgets and line items, and and can see that in the Stantec work product. So it would help me out, Peter, I think, if you were able to join us for that.
Do you have any kind of estimate how many hours?
I do not. I just, when Jim suggested it, I thought, I'm gonna bring it to you folks.
I mean, I support it in
Then I can
concept.
keep you updated every month if, you know,
I
before we
support
go off
it, I
the
support
deep
it
end.
100%, because the perspective you bring to this board is, from that standpoint, has been very helpful to us.
In our
Yeah,
policy, I'm sorry, do we have a cap? Did we build a cap into the professional fees? It could be, I can't remember if we have some.
Yes, there's an answer to that. 75,000 a year.
Per,
The agreement, for the
Total?
agreement.
Per the agreement.
Oh, no, that's a different, okay.
75 is if we decide to bring in a
Outside.
Outside consultants.
Right.
Yeah.
So
But there
it's
is an inside
25.
25,000.
Well, that's our purchasing policy.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
there's a cap for not needing to go out for bid.
yes, that I'm aware of, but I was just wondering about our cap for, does it come out of, does it go against that policy cap? And you know what I mean? That we have set?
So when we addressed this at the very beginning setup of the UPC, it was the city's opinion, and we sent a correspondence that we would be taking the invoices that we get from this group out of that $75,000 per year. And we have,
Remember that?
we haven't come anywhere close to that
No.
every year. And every year that 75,000 goes up by whatever the rate of inflation is. And so and that was a couple of years ago, so we're probably at about 85 or 80,000 technically right now.
This is Jim Behrman. If this would kind of help your discussion and your thought process, I would estimate 20 hours maybe for Peter's involvement. At least as you know, I look at it now, starting the study, and quite honestly, the whole thought process on my end and discussions with James Baker kind of came out really kind of in response to the tail end of the last study as we were making presentations, and perhaps I didn't interpret UPC comments correctly, but there seemed to be an interest to kind of being more involved in the process of the rate analysis early on, rather than the way it was brought to UPC more so at the kind of at the middle or the end of the process last year. So that was the reason for my suggestion to James. I certainly value Peter's input. Certainly, you know, we do these studies all over Michigan and across the country. You know, a lot of times we just do it with city staff. But there are other instances where our process is meant to be very transparent and we fold in citizen advisory panels, groups like UPC, etc. So that helps kind of give you some further background, at least on my thought process. Hopefully it does, so.
So Peter has the expertise to participate as described. It sounds like the dollars are within that 25,000 cap based on where we see the numbers from the summary. This is not on our agenda, so can we vote on it, or do we say we'll vote on it next month?
You could vote on it next month. I would
you
just
have to
ask
maybe
if,
amend the agenda to bring.
Yeah, I think we've got time for that, certainly.
and I think Jim was gonna put me in the loop with like the request and that type of stuff. I'll put that aside and that way I can be updated should you want me to proceed.
Thank you. Yeah, and I appreciate the thought ahead of time on that. I think that will be,
I
I
just
think
heard
it will
from
be
him
helpful.
yesterday, I think, so it was like,
Other comments?
Sure, thank you. First, I want to again thank everybody for participation, another very productive session. I commend you all for that. I'd also like to commend the task force work group that worked on the utility financing policy. I think it's excellent. I think in many ways it kind of dovetails with Jim Berriman's last comment. I mean, they're all kind of nesting together, and I think all of this work gives bigger transparency and comfort with what's going on. So again, great job. And then my final comment is kind of apologize because I didn't understand the discussion of mandatory connections was limited to the unique situation of one of well failures. I guess in perspective, I may be more aggressive about goals of establishing stable utility financing, and the mandatory connection may perhaps hark back to my experience in Texas. So I apologize for that, but again, commendations to everyone here. Thank you.
That's the state of Texas.
State of Texas, yes, state of Texas, not the townships, forgive me.
No, thank you folks for a great conversation today on all subjects. Thank you.
Great meeting.
Great meeting. Thank you. Anyone online wishing to comment?
Hi, Libby, it's Sherry. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna harken back a little bit to the mandatory connections, and then I'm not sure, I mean, I understand the work of this committee, but I just wanna kind of put this in the minds, is that we talk about resident commitment to sort of supporting this kind of expansion, and then my thought process is around connecting dots where we want to see what this committee wants to support the expansion of the water system, and then connect it to the most updated information from the United Way, which said roughly 38% of the households in Kalamazoo County are living in the ALICE, which I assume you all know what that means, in the ALICE level. And then also the desire to keep people in their homes. And I say all that to sort of like, can we connect those dots in any meaningful way that would provide funding for roughly 40% of the households in our community to make these connections in a way that don't separate them from affording their home? And I think there's opportunity there, you know, particularly through the Housing Commission at the county, and on their website, it states that deep and lasting change in the areas of rental subsidies, permanent housing construction, and related supportive services to the residents, for the residents of Kalamazoo County. And so I think that I guess I'm just asking or offering the idea that perhaps the UPC and our partners, if we're talking about mandatory connections, which I believe is healthy for the system overall, but if we can close the gap financially for vulnerable families who may not support this work, and by partnering, you know, sharing an idea with the county housing, like, hey, you know, could you create a pot of money to help people connect? And maybe the United Way, if we all value keeping people in their homes, having a sustainable system, and protecting our water resources, I just think that would be worth consideration. And for our friends at the city, I do not hate your detours, by the way, and I am super excited to see what the future holds.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. Any other? Hearing none. Peter, any comments? David?
So,
John?
I'm good, thank you.
James? Just, I'll add one thing to what Sherry said, in terms of affordability. The USDA does have programs in place for seniors to help with those connections. So that's a resource that Oshtemo steered people to for the sewer connections, and it still does, I'm sure, I don't remember all the details, and, but that is a program. And the state used to have another program that went away, and I'm not sure if it came back. It was beyond seniors, it was in general income, I believe, based. So with that, we have exhausted our agenda. Our next meeting is August 8th. Thank you.
That's really nice, thank you.
Definitely a meet in this meeting.
Yeah, when it's, we have everything.